Welcome to a regular meeting of the Oak Harbor City Council, February 21st. We see by the clock it is 6 p.m. We invite you to stand and join us for an invocation. Tonight's invocation will be led by Father Paul Pluth of the Catholic Community of St. Augustine, Oak Harbor, and we'll follow the invocation with a Pledge of Allegiance, with which I will lead. Father?
Thank you. Council members, citizens, because St. Augustine Church has been the object of a well-publicized act of violence a week ago, I'm also praying not only for the council assembled, but for our city. Join me in prayer. Spirit of wisdom, Spirit of guidance, continue to shine your light upon our assembled council members as they deliberate to find the common good and the just way for the welfare and needs of our city. Where there is disagreement, give them civility and patience, bonhomie and good humor, to persevere and bring them through at last to the harbor of agreed-upon decisions. And where there is unity, grant them the pleasure of the camaraderie and harmony of their work well done. Enlighten also the citizens whom this council serves, that those who work violence and harm in Oak Harbor may turn their efforts to a better goal, and that those whose hearts are set on the best for our community will not lose hope over the challenges we face. At the end of this day, with the work of this council completed and our own work done, may we confidently place all things in your hands. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Father. Please join me in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. We have a couple of absent city council members tonight, Councilor Tara Heisen and Mayor Pro Tem Danny Pagao. Yes. Yeah.
I move we excuse Mayor Pro Tem Danny Pagao and Council Member Tara Heisen.
Second.
Motion to excuse Mayor Pro Tem and Tara Heisen. Motion by Munns, second by Campbell. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, moving on to approval of the agenda. Councilor Servadius.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, motion to approve the agenda as presented by Servadius, second by Munns. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we're going to move right through item number 2. No presentations or proclamations for tonight. We're on to item number 3, which is citizen comment period. Citizens may comment on subjects of interest not listed on the agenda or items listed on the consent agenda. To ensure comments are recorded properly, state your name clearly into the microphone. Please limit comments to 3 minutes to ensure all citizens have sufficient time to speak. And I think first up is George Saul. George?
Looks like you're... No. Go ahead, please. Looks like I have backup this evening from Toastmasters. Thank you. I'm George Saul, 955 Condra Lane in Oak Harbor. Council members, Mr. Mayor, it's good to see everybody. I think the last and only time I've spoken with you was at a workshop a couple of years ago on a lighter topic when we did the Walk of Honor together, which I hope everybody agrees has turned out well. Tonight, Faith Wilder and I wanted to provide you a very brief update regarding the establishment of an overnight homeless shelter here in Oak Harbor. Now, the shelter obviously isn't going to solve homelessness, unfortunately. We're at that simple, right? But it will offer warmth and security to those most vulnerable in our community. And we know that we collectively are very interested in that. Faith is the board president of what used to be the South Whidbey Homeless Coalition, They offered to operate the Oak Harbor Homeless Shelter for us, and they have now name changed to the Whidbey Homeless Coalition. And it is a south to north endeavor, one of many that we'd all like to see cross the island, not stop at the demarcation line. And Faith and the Homeless Coalition are part of the effort to do that, to unify the island, particularly as it refers to this important topic. So the great news is that beginning in April, through the graciousness of the Christian Reformed Church hosting the shelter, we will start a shelter. We will have a shelter every night, 365 days a year, from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. So that's the overnight part of it. Most of the guests will have eaten at the Spin Cafe or other places. In this particular instance with the Christian Reformed Church, which is just past the golf course, they'll be vanned to the church, spend the night, and then vanned back closer to community services, back to the Spin Cafe in the morning. So 7 p.m., 7 a.m. And they'll have eaten, so they'll have a cot, sleeping bag with an insert, gets washed every day, the insert does, continental breakfast in the morning, and then in many cases off to their job or off to whatever their first appointment is of the day. The host site will probably alternate over the course of the year, probably every 3 or 4 months, to another community hosting facility. Many of the other churches have asked if they can become subsequent hosts. We'll come back in May. Oh, I mentioned Faith, I'm sorry. Faith went home ill. She's sick, quite sick, so she wasn't able to make it here this evening. She sends her apologies. We'll come back in May, do a workshop. We'll be operating for 2 months by then. What we need right now that, Beth, thank you for, we need lots of things you can imagine. And Beth provided a contact possibly for some furniture. We need volunteers for the staffing in the evening. So Mr. Mayor will be talking with Rotary. Opportunities to serve like this hit all the usual suspects, all the same groups and the same people that do so much in our community will be asked to do so much in our community again. In Rotary's case, for example, just to provide one example, and then I'll step aside. We're going to hopefully be able to serve for 1 week in April, Sunday through Saturday night, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., 2 volunteers a night, 7 days. So we'll need 14 volunteers over the course of that week from Rotary. And we'll act as the hosts for the guests, greet them, get them settled. Lights off at 10, continental breakfast at 5:30, and on with their life at 7 a.m. in the morning. So if you or your organization would be interested, shoot me an email, let Faith know. We see each other on the sidewalk. It's not hard to get in contact with each other. Thank you very much for the opportunity to update you.
Thank you, George, and congratulations. I know that you've been working on this for lots of your time has gone into this, and the community appreciates it, so thank you. Yeah, our best to Faith also. Okay, Mr. Taggart. Oh, sorry.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor,
Good evening.
City Council members, guests, Oak Harbor residents. My name is Teresa Coe. I am our Toastmasters Club 4902 president this year and also an area director who oversees clubs on Whidbey Island, Burlington, and in Everett. Our local club was in contact with your office prior to the February 7th council meeting, and we hear that you were out of town for some time. We're sorry for your family's loss to you and Rhonda as well, and offer our condolences. While communicating with your office, we were told nonprofits perhaps could have 10 minutes of your time during a meeting to talk about our open house and how we benefit our local community. However, we also told that you enjoy being efficient and allowing presentations unless under contractual obligation to do so. Furthermore, we are told you no longer offer proclamations if one already has been made because you don't have time. The good news is our state governor and other local mayors do have time. For example, Governor Jay Inslee and also Bellingham Mayor Kelly Linville each proclaimed February 5th to 11th, 2017 as Toastmasters International Week. They recognize Toastmasters International as a leading organization in teaching public speaking, leadership skills, which include meeting efficiency and communication development. The mission of a Toastmasters Club is to provide a mutually supportive and positive learning environment in which an individual member has the opportunity to develop oral and communication skills as well as leadership skills, which in turn foster self-confidence and personal growth. With over 250 Toastmasters clubs in Washington State, Oak Harbor is blessed with our club that meets on the 2nd, 4th, and 5th Tuesdays of the month at VFW on Goldie Road at 6:30 p.m. Tonight, I came to invite all of you to our next open house, which happens to be next Tuesday at 6 p.m. All of our meetings are free and open to the public. Tonight, I will conclude by sharing the governor's proclamation with everyone here. In front of you, I did leave you an open house flyer as well as a Toastmaster magazine so you can learn more about what we do. I'm sure everyone here recognizes this guy, wonderful governor of our state of Washington. I had the opportunity to meet him at a conference that he had in town here last year, and he's a delight. Therefore, I shall read the State of Washington Proclamation because I feel it's important. Whereas Toastmasters International is a leading organization in making effective and oral communication a national and international reality for all persons, whereas the ability to speak in clear and effective manner is a powerful and important skill that can help overcome barriers to effective performance in nearly every endeavor and line of work, whereas by helping people develop essential communication skills, Toastmasters International performs a valuable service, whereas after 8 decades of outstanding achievement, Toastmasters International has grown to over 12,000 clubs in 113 countries worldwide and nearly 5,000 members in Washington State. Therefore, our governor, Jay Inslee, declared February 5th to 11th as Toastmasters International Week. Thank you, and I hope to see you all next Tuesday.
Thank you, Ms. Cole. Anyone else for citizen comment? Yes.
You may not be aware of this, but I am the parliamentarian for the Toastmasters International District 2. Part of my job is to make sure that their meetings run efficiently. And I have expressed my concern on this particular idea of efficiency, which by me is interpreted as removing what I think are community building programs and events. If you want an efficient meeting, you'll quit saying who seconded something, and you'll quit asking for individual votes to approve the agenda. As I have mentioned before, you will say without objection. I have emailed the council and the mayor on exactly how to do that. Yes, I know you use standard code, and I quoted from the standard code. I don't just use Roberts. But what really annoys me is that we were given 10 minutes on the schedule. Okay, so then we had that 10 minutes taken away. So I'm pledging to the city council to waste 30 minutes of time. It'll take 10 of these citizen comment periods, 3 minutes each, so that we can understand how efficiency works. And we can understand that there is an importance not just in complying with state laws and contractual obligations, but in building and maintaining community. I also noticed that the mayor is so efficient that while Teresa Coe, the president of a nonprofit in the city of Oak Harbor, was giving her speech, the mayor was reading. That's interesting. I think that is very efficient, and I would like to, congratulate him. And I saw what you were reading. Yes, it was a Toastmasters magazine. It was other things too. Well, that's not really the point. The point is that in your endeavor for efficiency, you've also convinced all of your staff that this isn't the city of Oak Harbor's meeting. This is actually the mayor's meeting. Were you all aware of that? It's not my meeting. I'm just a citizen in the city. It's the mayor's meeting. So if the mayor doesn't want someone to give a presentation, then that's how it works. Also, I noticed on the agenda that there's a spot for presentations and proclamations. If there's a spot for it on the agenda, I'm assuming that there was a council in the past that decided that proclamations and presentations were important and probably passed some sort of procedural rule or ordinance to have them on here. So I'm going to go through all of the minutes of all of the meetings that you have all had and recorded that I can easily get a hold of, and I'm going to go through them and explain to you how they could have been more efficient or perhaps more legal. Because another thing as one of your members of staff explained to me, was that he spoke to all of the council members about the issue of this presentation not being allowed, and that they were all fine with that. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but there's this open meeting law in the state of Washington, and if you're doing what's called a hub and spoke meeting, i.e. going through someone else to poll the council members independently, then there's a clear violation of the open meeting law. But what do I know? It's the mayor's meeting, it's not really a city council meeting. Could be getting things confused. Let's see, my 3 minutes up yet?
Yeah, point of order, Your Honor. This gentleman's 3 minutes are up. Unless the council wants to extend his time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Taggart? Yes. Mr. Oldenburg?
Thank you, Mayor. You know, I'd like, for the benefit of the previous presenter there, that for the correction of the record, this is the council's meeting and not the mayor's meeting. We don't need a comment from you.
You should correct the administration that told me it was the
Thank you,
mayor's
Mr.
meeting.
Taggart.
You may sit down.
For the record.
This is the council's meeting. This is our opportunity to do the city's business in the public. Our mayor is the executive. He's the presiding officer of the council's meetings.
And the mayor's staff says that it's the mayor's meeting.
Anyone else for citizen comment? Going once, twice? Thank you very much. We are on to item number 4, consent agenda. How would the council like to, any change in that? If not, we'll move along and it'll get approved as presented. Okay. I'll start off item number 5 for mayor's comments. I want to tell you that we had a busy week last week in Olympia. Several of our council people were there. And we were able to meet with Senator Bailey and our Representative Hayes and Representative Norma Smith on more than one occasion. And we had some very good communications with them, and then we had some presentations that I think many of us took advantage of, and it was what I think it was a very productive week from the standpoint of presenting Oak Harbor's needs and what they can do to help us down there. And we've got some great representatives, as I think most of you know. We've got the Senate whip with Senator Bailey, and we've got the representative whip with Dave Hayes, and they are busy people, and they're working on our behalf. So I can't tell you enough how much we appreciate the ability to go there and communicate with them. And we do have some new art behind us here. Our artist for March and April is Camille Brighton. Camille comes to us by way of Wisconsin and Arizona. Her degree is in art therapy and art education. Her show at the City Hall features very colorful landscapes along with a bit of flora and fauna. Her preferred media is watercolor, but she also is skilled in acrylic, drawing, sculpture, and photography. She has won many awards. If you find time to stop by City Hall and appreciate her show, you will see why. You may especially enjoy her presentation of Oak Harbor. You will find much that is familiar in it. Take a moment and treat yourself. So thank you, Camille Brighton. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to councilor comments. Anybody got anything? Yes, Councilor Campbell.
Thank you. The last 12 years of my life, I've been on this city council, and it's been a fun run. But I want to announce tonight that I will not put my name on the ballot next year, when it comes up this year. There are a lot of reasons for that, none of them terribly negative. The biggie is my wife and I want to travel, and probably in March of 2018, we'll load up the RV and go, and probably come back about a year later. The idea is we've been all over the states, and we've seen some places that have really knocked your socks off. We've seen a lot of other places that are just nice. So we're going to go back to get our socks knocked off again. We're going to visit every relative we have in the United States, driving around. I'm looking forward to it, even though I'm the one that has to drive. That it's going to be a lot of fun. So thank you to the citizens, and thank you for the council to make this 12 years exciting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Campbell. Thank you. Yes, anyone else? Councilor
Thank you,
Holmberg.
Mayor. Well, Mr. Campbell, we're not ready to say goodbye to you right now. We're going to get our money's worth out of you until the end of this year. I'm quite sure we will. And it has been a pleasure, and it will continue to be a pleasure to serve with you until you have dismissed yourself from serving again. And thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Okay, other council? Anyone else? Okay. It's time for our city administrator, Dr. Merriman.
Thank you, Mayor. I've put in front of you, each have a comment sheet that I put together, and I'll just highlight a couple of the items we have on there. Under the people section, our recruitment dashboard shows the different HR efforts that we have going on right now. A couple of them to highlight. Under number 1, we do have a new hire. That's Talman Huck, and Talman is a gentleman who actually goes by Tally. So we will now have 2 different tallies working for us, so that'll be interesting. I did want to put out a final call as well for any recommendations you might have for the salary commission. We're looking to get that process buttoned up, and if you could have those to Nicole by February 23rd, that would be helpful. We also have right now an FTO program. This is the field training officers that take our new recruits out. We have 2 of them looking like they'll be finishing up that process on March 7th and March 15th. So that'll be nice. We'll have 2 officers that are full out as patrolling on the streets. And then finally, under people, we have the city council retreat. That'll be scheduled for April 6th. And we're confirming times and the place, and that will send you more information as that comes up. But if you want to mark your calendars for that date, we have that date confirmed up now with Skagit Valley College. Under money, this last week, as you may know, while we were down in Olympia, we submitted the $2.5 million capital grant to the legislature via Barb Bailey and our legislative reps. We'll see how that progresses through there. This is similar to the $2.5 million grant we got 2 years ago, and we're trying for a repeat on that. A couple other items we have coming up at the workshop actually will be tomorrow. We're going to be talking about a potential rate increase at the marina. So that'll be a new conversation. And then the other item we're watching this week is we have the Marina Tidelands lease item, excuse me, scheduled to go through the legislature right now. It has a fiscal note attached, and this is a special attachment that comes from Department of Ecology that'll be on there. We're working to get a copy of that fiscal note. But with those attached, then that bill has to move out of all committees by Friday. Right now, we have moved out of the House side. We're still waiting on the Senate side to see where that will go. Then in the final section, I have land and projects. The first 3 items are just updates on some of the things we have going around City Hall, everything from carpet replacement to our utility rate study, and we're working on that project right now to just develop the scope of what that work is going to be. To wrap up my report, I've got 2 different items. The first, we have Jeff from Orswell here tonight, and he's going to give us an update on the marathon.
Good evening, council members, Mr. Mayor. I'm Jeff Orswell with Orswell Events, and as you know, my team and I are providing planning, production, and promotion support on the Whidbey Island Marathon this year. We were asked just to kind of give you a 60-day out snapshot of where we're at on the efforts that we're managing right now. So if you can follow along with me on this PowerPoint deck. The demographics of the registered participants right now are tracking consistently with what we've seen the last couple years. Notable item is that over 58% of the folks currently registered are from further than 50 miles away from Oak Harbor. So it continues to be a regional draw, and really no other surprises on the numbers so far. The half marathon continues to be the most popular distance, and this is about the time, if you're still serious about training for a half marathon, you're not waiting a whole lot longer to register. Our anticipated participant number for this year is 2,100. We had just over 1,600 participants last year, and we're currently at just over 1,150 registered participants, which is about an 18% increase year over year, date to date. So we're pleased with those numbers so far, and still have quite a bit of marketing and promotion still to do. Here's a quick rundown of what we currently have going. Whidbey Weekly has been very gracious and a strong partner of the event, and we have a dozen weekly ads and a cover ad running with them. Race Center Northwest magazine has kind of emerged as the primary periodical for people who run races like this. Northwest Runner went away this last year, so we've really focused the majority of our industry marketing through that organization, both print and electronic, and both marketing the Whidbey Island Marathon and the Salish Sea Road Race Series. So those have already begun running and will continue to go through the next 2 months. Print collateral, hopefully you've seen rack cards and posters that were distributed around the area here, as well as we've been distributing through running stores and Boys and Girls Clubs and YMCAs and fitness centers and everywhere that will take them from us in Western Washington. We did a relatively small run early on and have another one planned that we can incorporate sponsor logos as we sell those. The electronic advertising continues to be kind of our bread and butter. We have an opt-in database, actually a little over 50,000 opt-in subscribers. We've already sent out 4 HTML emails to our folks, everything from price increases to unveiling the medal to things like that, to just generate an urgency in registering for the race. We also have been backing up those HTMLs with Facebook posts and boosting those where appropriate. And the Salish Seas Road Race Series partnership continues to be a good thing, and I think we're seeing some traction on that. And again, we're splitting the cost on promotion of that series with those other races through Race Center Northwest. These are the things that we're trying to get people excited about early on here, and again, create some urgency in registering. We designed this finisher medal on the left that we think is pretty cool, and it's been well received. The bridge and the opportunity to run across the bridge remains our main focus on trying to get people to register. The event participant shirt, this image shows a black shirt. We're still, to be honest, kind of debating upon a few different options. I think I shared with you when I first appeared here a couple months ago that we're trying to always look for opportunities to give people that pay the premium for the full marathon or the half marathon additional benefit. And so where we're at right now is probably a short sleeve shirt for 5K, 10K participants, a long sleeve shirt for half marathon participants, and a quarter zip for full marathon participants. We're still dialing that in, but that's kind of the look and feel that we're going for. Again, as I shared with you, we want consistency from all the electronic ads to the print ads to the medal to the shirt, all the way through to create a brand that will hopefully get traction as we go. We're also going to have customized bibs this year, so it'll say your name on your bib, which is appealing to runners. And then for many years, the model was you get lots of shots of you along the way, and then you have the opportunity to purchase them afterwards. This year, we've got a company engaged that will provide free participant photos, and we're still working to engage a sponsor logo that will appear on each of those photos as well. Finish line celebration with live music, food trucks, and beer garden. Again, if you've trained for 6 months for something, you want to revel in it. You don't want your bottle of water at the finish line and you're gone. So we want them to revel in the city and hang out for the rest of the weekend. Volunteers, we built out a comprehensive volunteer plan, everything from packet pickup the day prior to the race to event day, course marshaling, finish line operations, start line operations, all of that. We've engaged a volunteer recruiter who's helping us fill all those slots. So there is information now on the website. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, you go to runwhidbey.com. There's on the homepage there buttons. One of them says run, and you click on that and it'll talk you through all the price increases. As you can see on that slide there, prices do increase for all the races on March 1st. They will then again increase on April 1st, and then finally increase one more time going into race weekend. All of this, again, is kind of weather insurance. We're intending to try and drive registrations as early as possible. And then there's another button that you can click that says support on the same website there, and that takes you to an online volunteer registration tool where you can choose a different shift with packet pickup on Saturday or some of the various duties on Sunday. So we're actively working on all of that right now and feel real good about where we're at on that regard. So that concludes the update from our end. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions? Yes, Councilor Servadius.
Thank you, Mayor. You use the term weather insurance. Is that an industry term, or do they pay a premium to get guaranteed good weather?
Just an industry term. You know, we see this a lot on not so much marathons and half marathons, but short distance runs that can be a spontaneous decision based on the forecast. And so we don't want to wait that long. We want them to sign up now.
Good, thank you.
Yes, Councilor.
I may have missed it on the slide, but are you planning on doing the kids run, family run this year as well?
Indeed. Yes. Yep.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The last item I have then is our wastewater treatment plant update by Brad Arvidsson.
Good evening, and I'm here for our wastewater treatment plant upgrade. We've had, since the first of the year, some interesting weather. Snow in February is very unusual. It has some impacts on us. These guys were down there in the bottom the whole time steel. It's kind of hard with this picture, but they're actually doing that in the snow, and I felt sorry for them at the time. It has had some impacts on us, though. In terms of our recent activities, design, we're continuing to work on the 30% windjammer plans. We're hoping to have those preliminary plans out for review in the end of March, and hopefully bring it into a workshop in April. We did prepare a summary of our open house public responses, and we hope if it hasn't come out to you yet, you should see it the next day or so. We had, like I say, quite a good response on that, and the comments were quite interesting. And we continue to work on our SCADA software development system. Construction-wise, we are pouring concrete. We have slowed down a little bit. We're still ahead of schedule and below labor estimates, but this month took a toll on us. So what we were going into Christmas, we were way ahead, and we've kind of lost some of that. But we are actually looking forward to the next 3 weeks of catching us back up to where we were. We've done some steps to make that happen. We did complete demolition of the RBC plant. That was a chore. Had a lot of issues with it, but we got it done. We continued the stone column installation. That's the big blue machines out there, and hopefully by the end of next week they'll be done. Then we are continuing pre-construction activities for GMP number 11. We have about 20 contractors to get on board, and that's continued to be interesting. I've been announcing this in the last few meetings, and we did find additional human remains in the last day of plant demolition. We did resolve it. We also had found midden, which was discovered. That was undisturbed midden, so we had to remediate that. Again, both of those were impacted, taken care of using the MOA process. No construction impacts. But our archaeological services contingencies was completely depleted, and we do have a contract amendment with the ERCI as a later agenda item. Funding, nothing really new there. We did get the funding offer that I discussed last time, subject to legislative approval, and we do have a variety of Windjammer Park funding opportunities that we're chasing as an organization. Doug just mentioned one earlier. Upcoming major decisions, March 7th, we'll be bringing in some contracts with PSC and other utilities. That's mostly for bringing the power lines into the treatment plant, and we have to do some utility relocations to do that too. So that'll be another contract with PSC. We did one about a year and a half ago. Schedule-wise, pretty much still on schedule. This is a new schedule that we just finished off this morning. We have added another GMP. Now we're up to 13, and we'll be bringing that in probably in late March, early April. that'll be just mostly for odor control equipment. But right now, we're still very much on line to get our plant up and running summer of 2018, and hopefully as we get through this next round of contracting and pre-construction meetings, that type of thing, we may have some better news, but we're still very, very positive about where we are with the schedule. Of course, our public outreach, if anybody wants to get hold of us, we have our website, oakharborcleanwater.org. You can call us at 914-7000 or our city extensions. You can email us at treatmentplant@oakharbor.org. Our next community drop-in session is Monday, or you can call us and have an appointment if anybody wants to come in. Questions?
Yes, Councilor Munns.
Thank you, Mayor. When you talked about the utilities, I know that there was some fiber optics down there. Is that also going to be
Yes.
discussed? Okay.
Yeah, we have both Comcast and Wave in that corridor that we're dealing with. They're actually providing their own services. The other ones we're dealing with is Frontier. Actually, the school district has facilities in there, and Frontier and Cascade Natural Gas.
All right, and one more, please. Long time ago, and at different phases of this plant, Erica from the archaeology company has actually done some education thing with council members or people who want to come down. Well, now that we're kind of at the end of the demolition of the old plant, and have found more things than we thought possibly, is it possible that we might have some examples shown?
Yeah.
Or she could give them to the person who helps on staff most of the time with
I
it?
think we were hoping to talk about it. We have
Okay.
that on the agenda for the workshop tomorrow, and we can start
Okay.
talking about some of those concepts. We've had to keep it confidential because of the MOA requirements. But we think now we've got a good story to tell. We've had to, deal with a lot of issues. I think, it is investment in the city of Oak Harbor, and they should know, what they got. And so I'm hoping to bring out, there's a lot of interesting information, and we've done a lot of good things with archaeology compared to our past history, and I think that story needs to get out. Like I say, right now, because of legal requirements, we have to be confidential about it, but we do have a very good story to tell.
Well, I hope we can do it, because it's a big expense, and it is part of our history, whether you've been here for a year or, your family's been here for close to 100 years. I just think it's important, and we ought to celebrate it, and hopefully we can do something once the legal requirements are met. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any
Other questions? Anyone? Okay, thank you, Mr. Arvidsson. Appreciate that. Does that conclude? Okay. We are on to item number 6, public hearings and meetings. To speak during a scheduled public hearing or meeting, please sign in on the sheet provided. To ensure comments are recorded properly, state your name clearly into the microphone. Please limit comments to 3 minutes to ensure all citizens have sufficient time to speak. So item number 6A is ordinance number 1794, adopting FEMA, FIRM, and amending Oak Harbor Municipal Code Chapter 17-20. Mr. Lee?
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Tonight we have before you the adoption of the most recent update to the FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Firm, the flood insurance rate maps as they are presented to us from the Department of Ecology, from the state of Washington, and from FEMA. Those particular maps are updated on a periodic basis, not on a regular basis like we do with our building code updates. We do a typical 3-year adoption process. This is just a periodic update as new information becomes more available. As such, the City of Oak Harbor has been a participant in the flood insurance, National Flood Insurance Program with FEMA and with the Department of Ecology, the state of Washington, for a number of years. And as part of that participation, it requires that we, one, provide a flood prevention damage ordinance, and 2, that we adopt the maps and do updates as required through FEMA's modifications. The most recent information has been provided to us through the Department of Ecology. They include a flood insurance study, which was performed and dated on March 12th, 2016. And then we also have our new flood insurance rate maps, which were dated by FEMA to be effective March 7th, 2017. Some of the significant changes that we've seen in these new maps are some areas that we have down in the downtown district. We do have maps if you choose to see those. Otherwise, we're okay with proceeding without viewing those, again, unless you'd like to see them. And there have been some extensions of the boundaries that have gone north, just slightly north of Pioneer Way, to the east towards Midway. And then we've also had some increases in what the FEMA organization calls our velocity zones. And basically what those have to do with is regards to what they see as potential from wave run-up for earthquake and tsunami-related type of activity that might cause an increase in the level of damage and into the zones in which we might be looking at as far as our residential and commercial areas. Again, some of the other areas that have seen increases have been down around the Naval Air Station properties, down around Skagit Bay. And with that, those are the primary concerns that we've seen being presented in these maps. We've also added some additional clarifications, if you will, into the ordinance that we've presented to you for review to help us administer better those requirements that are going to be required of our public here in Oak Harbor. That concludes my presentation, unless you have particular questions.
Okay, before we do that, I'll open it up to the public, see if anybody would like to comment in the public regarding 6A, ordinance number 1794. Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. It's a privilege to be allowed to attend your meeting. I understand that floods and the boundaries and insurance are all very important things, but I think more important than the possible loss of life and damage to property is efficiency. And I think the council should consider allowing the mayor to just remove an entire wasteful chapter in our ordinance book to make it a little smaller and more efficient, and then he can just be empowered to approve these kinds of things on his own without the need for public comment.
Yes.
Please have your comments germane to the discussion on the agenda item, please.
I understand that it's about amending the ordinances regarding flood insurance, correct?
This is correct.
Okay, well, so I'm talking about ordinances regarding flood insurance, and my proposed alternative to approving the ordinance is to just empower the mayor to do such due to efficiency was the basis of my argument. Is that not germane?
Thank you.
I'm confused. Can I get a ruling from the chair as to whether or not my comments are germane? I mean, I can't actually request it because I'm not a member of the council, and it is the mayor's meeting. Okay, well, then I'll continue.
Point of order.
Oh, here we go.
Mr. Taggart,
Yes.
Miss Nikki Esparza, since you are a parliamentarian, I think this is inappropriate for our meeting at this time.
I don't believe that your comments are germane to the issue at hand here. We're talking about amending the code to change issues relating to the floodplain and our ability to get federal flood insurance.
Still don't have a ruling from the chair, and I'm
No, that's the ruling. That's our, the opinion from our attorney, Mr. Taggart, so.
Then, since it's a citizen comment period, I do have a comment on whether or not the comments in the citizen comment period are anywhere required to be germane to the hearing itself, and whether or not, even if they are germane, that the city attorney can make a ruling on the germanity of such, or anything of that nature particularly, because, I am talking about floods and loss of life and damage to property. And I think it would be far more efficient if the mayor just complied with whatever would get us the most money from the federal government, which would be better than the proposed solution that's before you today.
Thank you, Mr. Taggart.
All right. Thank you. It's a pleasure again being at your meeting.
Anyone else? Citizen comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll take the ordinance to the council. How would you, yes, Councilor Muntz?
Just a question, I believe it might be for Mr. Powers. When we were first discussing how the ordinance would need to be changed, and we were being explained, I believe, by Mr. Lee, on the maps on what was being different and where the line is from our current shoreline over on the other side of Pioneer Way. There was a discussion about possibly letting the realtors and businesses in town know they may not be aware that this was happening. We were going to try to do some type of contact, and I was wondering if anything had been done or where we were at this point, just making them aware that their insurance may change or what they may need to know to do to change. So I just was asking about that.
2 points of information I can share with the council. First is after our workshop the other day, Hal Hovey, who is not only one of our planning commissioners, but also a realtor and I believe a resident within the flood zone area, came up to me and said that FEMA has contacted each of those property owners individually already. So that's the first piece of information. Secondly, Mr. Lee and I discussed that what we would do is send our own letter on city letterhead once the council had adopted the rules and that they were in place. So we have FEMA's already done notification, and we're gonna send notification after the council has put them into place.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Any way we can keep the citizens informed over something that's a big deal, but they may not realize it, and I just think we're being a good neighbor since we're having a say in this to be sure everyone knows. So thank you very much. I appreciate yours and Mr. Lee's effort and the staff for making this happen.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
There's rarely such a thing as too much notification.
Thank you.
Okay, other council, yes, Councilor Allenberg.
Thank you, Mayor. I make a motion that we adopt ordinance number 1794, adopting the updated Federal Emergency Management Agency National Insurance Program Flood Insurance Rate Map and amending OHMC Chapter 17.20 related to flood damage protection.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second, and I'm not going to read that over again unless council would like me to. Okay. Motion by Allenberg, second by Munns. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We're on to no ordinances or resolutions, so we're on to contracts and agreements, Section 8. And we'll begin with Section 8A, which is contract renewal for fire station feasibility study, Carletti Architects. And I see our Fire Chief Merrill coming to the podium.
Good
Chief?
evening, Mayor and Council. As you know, we brought this forward on the January 17th meeting of the extension of the contract with Carletti and Architects for the feasibility study for the fire station. As you know, that contract expired December 31st. All the work had not been completed. At that time, Councilmember Allenberg asked for a member or a representative from Fair and Pierce to come, and he had some questions for them. So we have Chris Breland here this evening from Fair and Pierce, ready for your questions. Chris?
Thank you, Chief. Again, Chris Breland. I'm a principal transportation engineer at Fair and Pierce in Seattle, and we prepared the transportation analysis associated with the fire station options and the potential new location.
Okay, so, yes, Councilor Munns?
Do we need to have public comment or just ask the
Well,
questions in the presentation? It's kind of an odd.
Yeah, I guess we better open it up to the public. I'm sorry. I did not, I should have done that by now. So is there any comments from the public regarding the contract renewal for fire station feasibility study? Seeing none? Okay. Now, sorry, thank you, Councilor Munns.
I have a question. On page 2 of the report that was dated back May 2016, you were giving different quadrants. You divided into 4 and kind of the response time and the percent and stuff like that. I guess I was curious that there wasn't a comment made about what general time period you could do, 2 hours, 4 hours, I didn't care, but what general time period did most of the calls happen? And there wasn't any indication. Do you happen to know that? I mean, you were very specific on a lot of things, but I just kind of thought that they would say, well, generally, most of the calls seem to happen during these hours of the day or whatever. So I was very curious about that, if there was a general time, and whether that time was the same in all the areas or kind of different.
I cannot speak to the specifics. When we did the analysis, we took all calls over the 2-year period, which we collected the dispatch data from, and looked at how those call times came to be. I can't speak to the specifics as to when, on average, the calls come to the different portions of the city most frequently. It was just done sort of at an aggregate level, which is the industry standard way for analyzing response times.
Okay, can I follow-up question would be that feasibility would mean to me you would uncover every rock you could find on how we could make this better or do it more efficient. And part of the question I assumed was, what is the value or the percent of puts it higher that we've got to have the station now, or it can be put off a few years or whatever. But I guess sometimes if you figure out, all right, if it's a call at 5 p.m., generally the Highway 20 is more crowded. So if you took a route out of the station and you went down Whidbey Island, I know they can do the signal lights, and then you go on down and then you hit Heller, and then the roads can handle the fire station, but if you manipulate the traffic on less traveled roads, you could get south quicker. So would that make a difference in the response time? I mean, I'm trying to think of every way to look at the situation to be more efficient that could improve to, if we don't have the money to staff it or build it, I just don't want a building built and then it's empty because we don't have the money to properly staff it. And so are there other alternatives if we redid routes during certain times of the day? I would think transportation, you might have looked at that. Was that ever looked at?
We didn't specifically look at actions that the fire station could take in terms of rerouting vehicles. We don't tend to do that for fire departments because they tend to know the sort of specifics of traffic routing best. What I will say is that the average response speed is slightly higher than what we typically see for these types of communities. There is no standard speed on which the equipment is expected to travel. It's highly dependent on the conditions for those individual calls. So we don't make recommendations on those specific unless there's a known issue. For example, we did some work in City of Tacoma where there's at-grade rail crossing issues. So trains were blocking the access paths for fire calls. In that case, we had identified routing options and sort of a technology system for them to get around those issues. That's really specific to rail blockages because they're long in duration. You can't really move the trains in any quick way. For vehicle and vehicle congestion, there's so many different types of solutions. Fire department staff tend to come to pretty optimal solutions just from their own knowledge of the system, so long as they are equipped with the latest Opticom, which is the traffic signal overrides and other features to help clear the pathways for them to move forward. But we did not specifically look at that in this case, but I would note that there's nothing unusual in the response times that we saw in the analysis from the dispatch system.
Okay. I just know that in the report, they were a little worried that south of town was taking a little longer because of Highway 20. And I was just, I like to turn over all the rocks and
Sure.
see what the possibilities are. And when you said, oh, I'm the traffic expert, it's like, okay, I'm going to ask my question. Thank you. That's it for right now. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Yes, Councilor Holmberg?
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I have a question. I called earlier to Dr. Merriman about the discrepancy between the agenda bill math and the contract math. And the contract math. Was that resolved?
Working on that, there's a typo in the agenda packet versus the one listing. And we don't have all the answer yet on that, but we'll get that piece reconciled for you.
So if the council approves the extension or the continuation of this contract, then it will be resolved?
Correct.
Okay, all right. Then, for my comments and questions for you, could you give me your name again, please?
My name is Chris Brayland.
P.E., correct?
That's correct.
Okay, Mr. Brayland, I have two issues here regarding this item. One is probably the primary one, and that's the timing for a bond and M&O levies to support this. As you probably know, we have to go through that route to make this happen, and that will be a decision by the community for both the capital facility and the M&O. So in the feasibility process, it's my understanding that the $61,000 contract with Carletti was to, I'm going to read my notes here so I stay on track and not get side-railed here. Intended to be an independent analysis to assist us with a go, no-go decision as to location, timing, capital cost. I threw in M&O cost. That wasn't part of the deliverables for a second fire station. And I believe that we should challenge all previous and current assumptions in order to make a good decision regarding this fire station. And I have a copy, and I've read this copy pretty thoroughly, of the Freer and Piers. And in the background section, and that would be your page 21, the Freer and Piers report is relying on the 2015 Oak Harbor Fire Department annual report to support their statement that the Oak Harbor Fire Department is behind the coverage provided by other comparable cities, and that is without naming any comparable cities, to support this statement. And then, having said that, the report also continues that the Oak Harbor Fire Department has a better level of service than many of its peers. Those seem to be conflicting statements, and it appears to be relying on the Oak Harbor 2015 annual report. Could you clear that up for us, please?
So the data, the background piece was largely gleaned from the Oak Harbor report. We did read through that and sort of make some independent verifications. And I would like to clarify that in terms of just for our contracting piece, we were specifically identified to look at the fire station coverage and sort of the transportation context of that. The larger sort of costs of the capital facilities and the operations and maintenance of the actual facility, that's handled by Carletti Architects, who's the prime contractor, and we are brought on specifically for the transportation piece. I just wanted to make that clear that I am by no means a architect or sort of fire station operations and maintenance expert. But from the comment that you just raised, from reading the fire department's annual report, what we had highlighted, and I don't have the report in front of me, so I can't specifically name the peer agencies in there, but they're listed in that report. When we had talked about some looking at other comparable fire districts in terms of the being quote unquote behind some of the other agencies, it had largely to do with what's listed on page 1 of our report, which is sort of the staffing level, the coverage area, and the budget. It was really a synopsis to say what's the context for how Oak Harbor's department is operating. What we were specifically interested in looking at was the response time and the insurance rating sort of as it's related to that, which is the level of service that we were specifically asked to look at. How quickly can the fire department address calls? And in that context, that's where we noted, despite sort of their operating size and funding levels, the response times tended to be a little bit stronger than some of the peer agencies, which is where we started from our standpoint of looking at, well, given that being the case, how does the response time now fit with the context of the city and the expected growth? And if the aim of the city was to improve the coverage of that time, where might another fire station be located? We wanted to just provide that background so that when people look at that, there's some context to say, well, how is the fire department doing now on a couple of statistics? So that's why we thought it would be helpful to provide that background for context.
Okay. And then based on this report and what you just said, we basically are getting the summary of your analysis, your decision, but we're not being provided data. In other words, you're saying, just trust what we tell you that we think is the correct direction to go?
Are you referring to the background material?
Mm-hmm.
What we specifically said was, here's a summary of the Oak Harbor Fire Department 2015 annual report, which we cite so that anybody can independently review that. The other data in this report that's not in the background section is all our independent analysis of the calls and the travel times that it takes to get to those particular calls and how coverage is currently provided in the city. That's all independent analysis. The data are provided in this report. If you would like to know specifics about how we calculated the numbers or the tools by which we use to generate that, I'm more than happy to provide that elaboration here tonight.
What I'm looking for is that independent review and recommendation that is in addition to what our assumptions are. And I believe me, we have a good fire department. There's no question about that. And we have good management staff on that fire department too. But when it comes, I think, at least to this council member, as I think it does for all the other council members, I think we dig into the information and not just arrive at conclusions based on somebody else's summary. So I'm going to move on very quickly here. In your report also, the fire response coverage on page 2, figure 1, it mixes the 2036 population growth with the current call density per 1,000, and it says 1,000 people. Was that supposed to be 1,000 people or 1,000 households for that area? Which is it? Page 2, and that is on those on the quadrants.
Yeah.
That you,
Yes, I believe it is per 1,000 people, but again, that's what it said. I don't, I would have to verify to be 100% sure, but.
now, if you have to verify it to be 100% sure, how can I be sure?
Well, so let me explain the reason or the rationale for putting that information in there. What we did for the call density was when we do these types of analyses, sometimes an area with a low or long response time has a relatively low call density. So what we're trying to show here is, how are the calls distributed across the city, and are there areas that have high call densities that have longer response times? So I'm, quite certain that what we put in the report, the call density per 1,000 people, is the accurate number. But I don't have the number in the back of my head to confirm that. I'd be happy to follow up with you if that's call density per people or call density per households. The key point being that what's the relative density? It's going to be the same, be it households or people, because we derive that from the same basic data. So what this is trying to illustrate is that we have relatively even call densities in 3 of the 4 quadrants, and the response times on the western half of the city are longer than on the eastern half of the city. So from an exposure standpoint, the folks in the southwest quadrant in specific have for their call density, have a longer response time than you would see in the other portions of the city.
And I got that pattern too. Then while we're on that topic, the growth projections for 2036 in the west half of the city ranges from 13% to 26% increase by your matrix there.
Correct.
And is your analysis taken into account the city's new stormwater management LID program that, in my opinion, will very likely slow down or substantially slow down the development of undeveloped properties for residential use?
What we took for the growth assumptions were the growth projections as outlined in the comprehensive plan update. So to the degree, working with city staff, that's what we chose to incorporate in here. To the degree those LID changes were incorporated in the comprehensive plan, I am not, I don't know, but we use the comprehensive plan growth targets.
Okay, the database that you use is from our comp plan.
That is correct.
Okay, and that's stated in this program too. I was curious if you had any conversation with the staff about the new LID regulations, which again, in my opinion, will increase the cost of a piece of property, a lot, a buildable lot, within a residential plat, which very likely could slow down the outward movement of population growth in that area. So I'm going to ask you this question. Is it possible that future West Side Fire Station may not be needed in the next 10 to 20 years if the residential plat development does not materialize as fears and peers and the Oak Harbor comp plan growth projections announced?
So what we did, I am not here to recommend that, yes, you should build a fire department, or no, you shouldn't build a fire department. What we identified was that even under today's condition, a significant portion of the city does not meet the NFPA, which is the National Fire Protection Association, and the Insurance Standard Organization coverage recommendations for response times. That was our primary finding of the report, and what could be done to mitigate that was the suggestions to get up to 99% coverage of both the current and projected population. That's where we had worked to, well, where would a location, a fire station location be? We also tried to answer the question of, well, could you just modify staffing at the existing location, the existing Fire Station 81, to provide better coverage. That was our specific charge, was to say, how could different options provide greater coverage within those two standard pieces? I am not in a position to sort of recommend to a city, yes, build a fire station or not, because it's a much more complex issue than response times. I'm here to provide our recommendation as to if you want to change the amount of city population covered under different response times. That's what our report specifically sought out to do, and that's what the information in here provides.
Okay, and I'm going to come back to that comment here as I move through my notes, because there's another one tied to it. And under the fire response coverage portion of your report, ICOM data for calls is not represented to us in this report. And this kind of ties in with Ms. Mons had just said. And because I was looking for the types of calls, because we commingle fire, EMT, and police. I mean, they're all going when something happens. I don't know that fire goes to all of them or that police go to all of them, but they're calls to ICOM. So how are they segregated out of that? The time of the calls, the time of the day is important to me, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And the days of the week are important, and the nature of the call. They're relevant pieces of information determine if we have a time on distance problem or if we have an isolated traffic choke point problem. And when I was speaking with our fire chief early on in this thing, one of my concerns, even before your company or Carletti were brought on board, is are we going to address traffic? Does that help improve the response time and solve part of our traffic problem with the same dollars or similar dollars? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, yes, I understand the question. So if you like, I could try to address a couple of the points
Okay.
that you raised. So you had asked about the types of calls that we processed from ICOM, and I'd be happy to send you the database that we got from ICOM so that you can look at the types of calls, the time of day. We have it coded in GIS, so you can see exactly where the call was. We only looked at the calls where the fire department responded to. We did not look at police dispatch calls. So the fire department, be it EMS or, fire apparatus, had to be responding to that call. So we have all the data segregated as you might choose to look at it, and we did not put it in here. I think that's an oversight on our part, but I'd be happy to provide the full database to the fire department and or directly to you folks if you want to look at that, so that you could look at those questions in specific. When we did, one thing I think, let me, if you don't mind, I don't know if everybody has the report in front of them, but if I could draw your attention to figure 2, which is the specific coverage map.
Can you give me a page number?
Yes, I'm sorry, it's page 4 on our report. I recognize this might be embedded in a larger report, but, and it's figure 2. The coverage map showing the 4-minute travel time is shown there in sort of a purple or pinkish coloration. Highway 20 traffic crossing Highway 20 has some effect on the response times, but the predominant, when we cut up the data to look at, well, are the actual travel speeds different in different portions of the city? We found in general the travel speeds are not different in the western versus the eastern half of the city in terms of the actual routes to get there. And we do that sometimes because certain times when we work with different cities, portions of the city are much slower than other portions, and we have to recalibrate our model. That didn't appear to be the case here, so I would say that traffic congestion plays a bit of a role as it is crossing Highway 20, but the response time did not show a distinct pattern that travel along Highway 20, for example, is significantly slower than traveling on alternate routes to get to fire calls. In other words, we didn't have to segregate by what we call functional class the different types of roadways to recalibrate to the response times. In general, what we found was that the response time rate of getting there was about 27% below the speed limit of the road, and that takes into account all the traffic signals and whatnot that have to be traversed. So that was how we ended up with the travel time maps, was through that analysis. And again, we wanted to make sure that are there some key features that we need to be mindful of that portions of the city behave differently? And so we go through a number of iterations to figure this out. So that's where we come up with the response time numbers, and why, while I don't want to diminish the importance of traffic congestion, this is pretty typical of what we see in an urban fire response area, is that you get fairly uniform speeds of how dispatch occurs. And yes, it can be a little quicker at night, but a lot of the calls, when we average them out, we get this sort of even pattern where, unless there's something unusual, we don't often see like queues or other things getting in the way of fire response, because fire departments tend to find ways to get around those and not be overly congested by those specific areas. So that's a long response on that, but I just want to give some background.
And so you can probably understand why I was asking for, and I think Ms. Munns was asking for it too, is that response time through our choke points, because we have a couple of them here during the AM and PM peak periods. And if we had the response times of days, both the weekends and through the week, I would really be curious if that merits a full-time 24/7, 365 station for response time based on those peak times.
Sure.
And maybe because you're talking about average time. You're using average. I'm getting more into the weeds on this thing. Is there another alternative if we don't need a 24/7, 365 station? Because that means a lot of money to the ratepayers and the community if it's not necessary. And that's not to diminish the need for safety and fire service, response time, stuff like that. We have to try to kind of put those two graphs together to get that benefit and that cost factor together. So this council member would really like to have that more in-depth data about that. And then that leads me to then the next item in your analysis of additional staffing. Is it your recommendation, or would it be your opinion, that the level of service could be temporarily improved by adding additional staffing to the existing fire station until, number one, we have a better understanding of the future growth rates and an address to the traffic choking solution I'm referring to it as, those AM, PM peak things. And the city is closer to choosing a site, which we don't have site-specific, so that we would have a site development, site plan, and a building that is more site-specific, so we're not spending a lot of money playing with hypothetical sites. And number three, when the city has identified a reasonable funding source to build the station and to staff and maintain it. I mean, there's some priorities out in front of us yet before we get too far down the road on this thing. Then the final question, and this is probably for me to answer in this situation, and does the draft report provide enough relevant data to make a decision tonight? And for me, it is no. And are we getting ahead of ourselves based on the funding, the availability of funding, the process of funding, and the timing to build and maintain the station? And I think we are getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. I don't want to spend a whole bunch of money for product that is going to basically wither on the shelf. I mean, you know this, you've been in this business long enough, I can tell by your age, that, you know, this data and these analyses have a shelf life to them, and so we don't want to do it again. So if you could deliver that data to us so it's more helpful for us to help and work with the decision process with our staff, I would certainly appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilor Nolan? Yes. Anyone else? Councilor Servadius?
Thank you, Chief. This is probably a little bit more for you. And I know we should know this, and you've told us this before. This essentially the second half of this contract, or maybe Chris wants to answer. Predominantly, what will those funds be used for?
Part of that was to do a rough design of the facility, also cost analysis, so we get an idea what the facility is going to cost us. It also looks at site elevations, the design of the facility, the use of the facility, and projections of cost.
Okay, thank you. You know, I think there's the trend, we know there is a need. The question, and we've all kind of hinted at it, but it's obvious then how do we pay for that need once we know the time is here? And so for me, I'm not opposed. I mean, we at one point approved this contract amount. I do share the same concerns, so that I think Mr. Allenberg is expressing fairly strongly that we don't want it to be an investment that expires, or I don't know if expires is the right word, but that it has a shelf life that may need to be revamped and revisited. And so, but at some point you have to take those steps towards finding out what the true need is and what the cost will be, and where can that station be sited. I know they reference, and Chief is working on some of these locations. So I think at some point here, wasn't there part of this was a PR piece, or does that come later as far as communicating with the public?
It is part of the piece as well.
In this dollar amount?
In this dollar amount, that is correct.
Okay. That's all I have at the moment. Thank you.
Councilor Wassinger?
Councilmember Allenberg and Servadius mentioned a shelf life, and we do have reports that our city has done that have sat on shelves. So what, though, exactly is the life of this report?
Oh, good question. You know, what we know today with our response time, where the location of the station is, where we look at our 4-minute time frame, and we also have to look at the 1.5-mile radius that both Washington Survey and Rating Bureau, NFPA, and the insurance organization all establish. We've far exceeded our 1.5-mile radius for our first 2 engine company. We're 3.2 miles away from our original station. So we know we far exceed the requirements that have already been established by these organizations. One of the big things we got when Survey and Rating Bureau was here was that you are far past your 1.5 mile, you're even past your 2.5 mile radius for your ladder truck. So we know today we're already deficient in those areas. So that part's not going to change. We know that where the growth is going to continue. And in doing so, we know that we're going to have to look at something as far as how are we going to mitigate that growth and the growth that has already occurred. Because we are far exceeded our capabilities. When you look at what the NFPA says in NFPA 1710, it says that we're supposed to have a full first alarm assignment, which is 2 engine companies, a ladder truck, a command officer, and a safety officer, 16 people on a residential structure fire of 2,000 square feet. We don't meet that at all. We're not even close to meeting that. So we know that those are issues that we're going to have to address at some point. The report that we have, our station's not going to move. So we know that growth is going to continue. So these numbers, in essence, actually are going to diminish on us at some point as we see the growth occur and what we know is going to occur or what we're projecting is going to occur. So when we look at what the traffic analysis shows us, response time, travel distances are going to remain constant. When we look at the station, we can design a station for a piece of property that we're considering. Can we modify that station if we find another piece of property? Yes, but the basic design that we're looking at the station that we're having today would probably be the design that we would use in just about any location, site-specific, of course, width and depth. But in order to fit the station on, we know what we need in that station just to house the facility. So those would remain pretty consistent 5 years from now, 6 years from now.
Thank you.
Councilor Surveillance.
Thank you. So for me, thank you for that, Chief. I'm going to support this in that I'm a numbers guy and I want to know what it's going to cost. And it sounds like this is a step to getting there. And specifically then, how do we communicate? Well, we need to know what it's going to cost to not only build it and staff it, but then how do we communicate that to the public? I know the public is generally supportive of public safety in general. It's a good thing. But specifically, how do we make this, whether it's a 5-year, 10-year, 20-year timeline, I'm not sure, but how do we need to know exactly what the need is and then how do we pay for it? So hopefully that will come out of this if it moves forward. Thank you.
Councilor Almberg.
I have a couple of questions in here for the engineer. I mentioned about the cost being site-specific. That also includes on-site and off-site. And in your presentation, you have 4 sites, and some of the sites have significant off-site traffic improvements on those. So when I'm talking about site-specific, I can understand that today you can estimate out the cost of a floor plan and a parking lot and all that on site within reason, subject to soil conditions, et cetera. But you can't necessarily just grab out of the air off-site like traffic improvements on the streets or the highway. And in this particular case, you picked 4 sites and you have the opportunities and challenges on that, and some of those have challenges that are on SR 20. The other thing I noticed in this report is the Fears and Peers I'm not going to say it a recommendation, it would be your favored site is a site that we actually had DCG do some preliminary site plan study for that. Is that correct?
That was and are you referring?
I know these are architectural questions probably for you.
Well, are you referring to the Fort Nugent Park site or?
Yeah, I'm referring to SR 20 in Southwest 24th. Is that yeah, I think that's the one on the highway.
So these were earlier sites that were sort of, handed to us by the architects and the fire department as potential opportunity sites for different locations, and so that we could then run the analysis in terms of, well, how would they help to close the gap on the coverage pieces. So none of them were necessarily our most favored site. The site that we've identified providing the best coverage is near the vicinity of Swantown Road and Fireside Drive, I think is the intersection we listed in there. But these other sites were just used to help sort of say, well, what's the type of conditions that we might expect to see at these different locations? And one point of note in terms of a facility like a fire station, in terms of off-site mitigation, like traffic type mitigation, fire stations, in terms of a SEPA compliance, which is where that term usually comes up, don't generate enough trips to warrant off-site mitigations in most any case. They're also an essential public facility, which has some special circumstances. When we were noting some of the challenges, for example, that Site 1, SR20 and 24th Avenue, if you put a fire station right with a direct access onto SR20, it might be warranted to put in an emergency vehicle signal installation. That would be a site decision that would be made with the architects, but to be able to create a break in traffic on a street like that, that might be something that we would look to be considered. That's not, we didn't, again, the conclusions of this report were mostly to do with the actual coverage that could be provided under different locations, and then the architecture team would work to come up with the specific design features of that. So if we were to be asked our opinion, we could weigh in on that, but that, again, was not the specific charge of what our contract was.
Thank you, and I understand that. But then for Chief Merrill, it's my understanding that initially, one of the preferred sites, even by you, the fire department, is the Fort Nugent Park site. Is that correct?
It was.
I know that
That's the
was
key word.
there.
That the was is there now.
That's where that's it. But we did spend some money preparing a preliminary site plan and a floor plan. We spent money on this. As it turned out, there were complications with the boundary line adjustment and other issues that were, I think actually you probably figured those out.
That is correct.
Okay, so we paid somebody else to tell us the obvious then? Is that what you're telling me?
I can't say that, but after doing some more work, the park was not the best location as we thought it was going to be from what we had talked about in years previous because of what had transpired years ago as being the park as a potential property. As we know, that thanks to Mr. Servatius, we did find some other property that may become available that may serve well, as you and I have talked about.
Okay, and just one more comment, and then we'll move this along. Sorry, Mayor. And then, would it be in our best interest to, let's say we go forward with the design, is it in our best interest, if we really don't need it right now, to secure the property in a peak real estate market? Or should we wait until we're in a different market?
Well,
this is the public's money now.
It is the public's money, but you and I have a different opinion of when we need this fire station. From my point of view, we needed this fire station 5 years ago, just because of the growth and because of what we've seen in the Southwest Quadrant. We knew this day was going to come at some point. And in doing so, you know, how do I best word this? Can I justify a fire station in that location right now? Yes. Can I justify a fire station in that location right now? No. I could justify it both ways. If I looked at public safety, response time, and what we owe the citizens, then I would say absolutely yes. And I've shared with all of you before, I've got some audio tape of an incident that I wish you would listen to, but I know most of you don't want to listen to it. And the difference between 4 minutes and 8 minutes and what the outcome is. It is very eye-opening.
You shared that with me.
I did share that with you, and you understand exactly what I'm talking of. I have to look at cost, and I know cost is a big issue. And I've said this to all of the council members, you know, $3 million, if that's the price of the fire station, is, and I don't want to minimize this, is cheap. Staffing it and maintaining it every year is expensive. And I'm in total agreement with you, absolutely total agreement. But when I go around the city and I look at the growth and the growth patterns and I know that I've got a crew of, and I'm singing to most of the choir here because I've had this conversation with just about every one of you. When I have a crew of 4 on, and they're at Crescent Harbor Elementary on an emergency call at Crescent Harbor Elementary, and a fire comes in on Xavier Drive, that's 6.5 miles. Or I depend on somebody else, and North Whidbey Fire and Rescue may be on a call. The Navy might be on a call. And I've got a graph from NFPA that shows the difference of fire in 1 minute, 2 minute, up to 15-minute increments, and where the most amount of damage occurs is at the 8-minute curve. So if I know that I've got a crew of 4 and they're on the far east side of town and something happens on the west side of town, we have a problem. If I have a manned station on that southwest quadrant that takes care of the southwest and the northwest, at least I've got a crew of 4 there that's able to respond rapidly. Question has come up about, additional staffing at our station. Yes, that is a big issue if we have concurrent calls, which we do 11% of the time. But the fact is, it's still 3.2 miles from our fire station to the furthest western part of the city. So we still know that travel distance is the same. The response time is still the same. The only way to change that is to have another location that's closer to where those neighborhoods exist. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And again, and I believe that, at least I'm going to speak for myself, when I go to the public and say, I'm going to support this, I want to know the facts, not alternative facts. I want to really have substantive facts in there, okay? And when we have a station, I don't want to have a station that becomes an empty shell because there's no funding for an engine company or the people to fight the fires and maintain the station. So tell me how we're going to fund the backside of this thing once we have the building.
You don't know how many hours I have thought about how are we going to fund it. And you and I are in the same wavelength. I don't want to build a fire station that sits empty because it does us no good. I don't want to hire 5 people and put them on one section of the city that doesn't improve what we're trying to accomplish on the other side of the city. So that becomes very difficult. When we look at funding the fire station to build the facility, the fixed cost, general obligation bond is the more than likely way to go. The issue becomes how are we going to staff it and where are the funds going to come from to pay for those people. There are alternatives. We can look at what's called the SAFER grant from FEMA, which is where you go out and you request grant money from FEMA. I have some reservations with that, as I've spoken with most of you about my reservations with the FEMA grant. It is a potential idea. Do we look at doing an excess levy? Do we look at doing an M&O levy? Do we ask the voters, what are you willing to support? If the voters come back and say, we don't want to support it, done deal.
Do you do that through an information vote before you do a capital facilities bond vote?
I think part of that would be part of our open houses to find out the feeling of the neighborhoods. If I could go on the number of people that ask me throughout the week, when are you going to build that fire station? When are we going to start on this project? You've talked about it for 5 years. If I had every one of those voting yes, I'd say we'd have all kinds of money. But it's a dilemma. I mean, there is no doubt it's a dilemma. And it's going to be a tough one to get through. And we've had this conversation.
Yeah. Thank you. And I've been assured that we're going to get that data that we ask for through you at some point in the very near future.
I have most of that data.
Okay.
Already.
I'll be looking at that.
It's been in your annual report.
No, I'm talking about the traffic count and the...
Oh, traffic count.
Yeah, the other stuff that I just talked to him about.
Yeah.
So, I still have reservations about this, but I want to get that information, and I am going to support this to continue on with this. But I hope we don't get a request for additional funds for not in scope work or something like that.
Okay.
My word is my bond, you will not.
That's on the record.
It is on the record.
Okay, Councilor Servadius.
Thank you. If there's no further I don't want to cut anybody off, but I would move to authorize the mayor to sign the feasibility study contract with Carletti Architects.
Second.
So we have a motion for the mayor to sign the contract that you've been discussing now for about an hour. A motion and a second. Any other conversation about it? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay,
Thank you, council.
8A. Thank you, Chief. We're on to item number 8B, Wastewater Treatment Plant Professional Services Agreement with ERCI, Amendment number 8. Looks like Mr. Arvidsson coming forward. Oh, our city engineer, Mr. Stoll.
Mayor, council members, thank you for having me here tonight. I got my PowerPoint all set and ready to go. What we're here to talk about tonight is whether or not this works. Maybe I got the wrong one. There we go. Okay. So what we're here to talk about tonight is Amendment number 8 to Equinox Research Consulting International, ERCI. We've been working with them for quite some time. Since May of 2013, we issued our initial contract with the ERCI, and that was to research some of the sites in the Windjammer vicinity, namely along the north side of the park. But that's how long we've been working with the ERCI on this project, since before we even had a site selected. As we moved along, you can see when we got to Amendment 3, we were working on the Memorandum of Agreement. And that was a fair amount of effort to get to that point. We went through all the permitting. Part of that is Section 106, which is a federal requirement as part of our funding. And that led us to a Memorandum of Agreement, that took 4.5 months to complete, when typically it takes at least 6 months. And that was through a very cooperative effort. So from that point, we moved into construction, and we started the outfall with Amendment number 4. And Amendment 5 moved into the site prep A, which is where we dug down about 5 to 7 feet until we hit groundwater, doing some early exploration to try and reduce risk on the project. We had estimated in our previous explorations that if we were to encounter cultural resources, we'd encounter them shallower rather than deeper. That, as it turns out, we didn't find much with that effort. And interestingly enough, as soon as we started digging in the parking lot, right in front of the treatment plant, which we left paved for our operators, we did find some cultural resource in that area. From that, we moved on to the deep excavation and the demo and utility relocates. And that's where things have gotten a bit interesting for us. You know, when you're doing demo, this is something we would have had to do no matter where the plant went or how close or far from the park we are. That plant would have needed to have some form of demolition, and that's been kind of a hiccup for us the past couple of months. What I do want to say is that we've stayed ahead of it. So what I kind of tried to show here is above the bar, it was all planning and permitting, and below the bar was construction efforts. So we've done incremental contracts. This is something that, for a couple of reasons, that allows us to come back and check in with council on regular updates. Plus, it was a very lengthy time frame, so it's kind of hard to predict what's going to change with the project. So, you know, as we went through site exploration, permitting, the Memorandum of Agreement, and construction, we've come back to you with multiple amendments, and that's why we're up to 8. Currently, the contract amount is less than 1% of the anticipated construction cost, and if you compare that to other projects we've had, that's really good. It's still a sum of money, but it is far better than we've had as far as that goes on other projects. So I had this question a couple times come from different ways, is why do we contract archaeological services when we have a staff archaeologist? One person can't do it all. If he happens to be sick one day, you can't stop an entire project. So we really do need the support of a consultant to help us with that. In addition, as you saw the timeline, Kelly was involved with this well before we had a staff archaeologist, and her name is on the permit that we acquired from DAP, along with ours, as responsible parties to uphold that permit. And she's also a party to the memorandum of agreement with the tribes and helped negotiate the work plan associated with that. So just as a reminder, the memorandum of agreement just basically says that all the federal, state, and tribes and us will all work together if we come across some cultural resource. Attached to the back of that document itself is really short, but attached to the back of that is a work plan that describes how we will go about working with cultural resources when we encounter them. And that was drafted, created by ERCI. So the status of things, the amendment number 7, which we would hoped would last us a little bit longer than it has, included contingencies for 1 cultural resource find and 14 hours of field work, various other assumptions built in there, but that's what it was set for. Now the activities that we've encountered since award is we've encountered multiple isolated human remains, and an intact midden. Now, all of those that have occurred since number 7, we couldn't have foreseen. They were underneath existing structures or in fill around existing structures. With that, and through the MOA process, we were able to, the first one we were able to clear in less than a week. And by the time we got to the 5th one, we were able to clear it in less than 2 days. And on top of that, we encountered a lens of intact midden, which is very important because it preserves human remains very well. And we worked with the MOA participants and cleared that area for construction in a timely manner and stayed out of the way of the heavy construction equipment and successfully mitigated that risk without slowing down construction. And we did that by adding staff when necessary or augmenting staff when necessary. So the proposed scope of work that's in the Amendment 8 is to do the last the decommissioning of the existing plant and structures, monitoring various activities throughout the area. We expect this to taper down to some degree because a lot of the demolition and excavation activities will minimize for a bit and then probably pick back up again when we get to the park. We are also expanding the area of potential effect, the APE, to include the park improvements we're proposing. And it also includes a contingency for curation of the objects associated with the project. And with that, I'll leave it to any comments or questions you might have.
Okay, before we take it to the council here, I'd like to open this up to the public, see if we've got any comments? Seeing none, I guess we'll bring it back to the council and start with Councilor Wassinger.
Thank you. So I'm reading right off of the agenda bill that, and as you said, that the archaeological monitoring for the remainder of the work is expected to decrease now that the major excavation is nearing completion. But on the list of, I guess maybe you would call it your scope of work, on the ongoing, let me pull up so I say it right, ongoing monitoring. For example, the administration work, it's asking for 56 units for a total of $8,050. That's in the current amendment, the cost of the current $300,000 amendment. But in the amendment that we approved back in September, it also, and that was for the ongoing monitoring, asked for the exact same amount of units, 56 units. Are we expected to double the amount of ongoing monitoring for, and it's several things like the administrative work, because I thought in September that was to get us through 2018, and same with this. So I'm just wondering why it's so much more when we're expected to decrease the amount of major excavation.
Sure, that's a great question. There is a significant amount of administration and paperwork that goes along with archaeology. It might all seem like Indiana Jones and standing out there doing the work, but there's probably as much, if not more, office work that goes along with reporting. And if with the additional fines that we've had, cultural resource fines that we've had, that's increased that work substantially. I also have Kelly Bush with the ERCI here. I don't know if she'd like to add anything to that or not.
So thanks for asking the question. Some of the things that we are we based our scope on in September have changed somewhat. So the numbers that I developed for this scope that's supposed to take us to the end of the project had to do with activities that were provided to me by the project engineer, and they include the kind of work that's happening in the areas where we're modifying the APE, which we didn't actually know in detail about in September. So the administrative cost stays about the same, you're right. It costs the same amount of my time, because that is primarily my time to help manage activities and monitors and the data that gets pulled from the daily monitoring. So that's still going to take us to the end. The reason that we used up all of that money now has to do with the drastic complexity that we weren't able to predict that started primarily in September with the increased intact deposits in the outfall corridor, and then the number of human remains that we did not expect, and then the additional intact deposits. So as a context, from 2013 to December of 2015, we didn't encounter any human remains. We didn't encounter any unpredictable intact deposits. That's all happened in 13 months, with the focus being from September to now. And from December 23rd to now, it's been drastically different. So although the assumption is that we aren't going to need a lot of monitors between now and June of 2018, the standard that we've been provided that we based it on was 2 days a month and 4 days a month for 3 months. So that it was an equation that we used based on how we think the construction and the development of the site area is going to be. Did that answer your question?
Thank you. I have one more along the same lines. You may help. This is not a numbers issue. It's the final summary report. You have 160 units, and back in September, you also had a final report on that ongoing monitoring too for, let me see if I can find it. Where is it? Sorry, hang on one second. Final summary report, the same thing, 160 units. I mean, are you doing double another final report? I mean, why to add on 160 units for a final report that we've already paid for a final report? Is it double a final report?
No, I can easily answer that. The change in our reporting requirements from just September to now is pretty drastic. This is one of the things that Councilman Munns is always asking about. What is it you do down there? When we have unanticipated discoveries, the reporting requirements for that are considerable. So not only do we have to report some detail to the state and the tribes, but we have to do it quickly. It means pulling people in. I have 24 hours to report enough detail that the state can make some kind of evaluation and decide, do they need to come up tomorrow morning, or do they, can they come up in 2 days? So that reporting requirement is quite a bit different when we find a lot of things that require some kind of evaluation or consultation. And for the connector, the outfall connector work that we did inside of City Beach, so that's the work in of City Beach, we encountered a great deal more intact shell midden than we had initially hoped we would encounter. We had modified our plan to stay inside the old footprint of the outfall, and it really just wasn't possible to do that. So the accepted plan in order to dig through that required a great deal more analysis and reporting. So it was unanticipated, and that's why we ate that part of our budget.
Okay, other Councillor Servadius?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Stowell, you said that right now with the amendment, we'd be at about or less than 1% of the construction costs, and you reference that to other projects we've done. I'm more curious, how does that work out? I don't want to use us as the standard, but a traditional contract, similar types of projects.
If it was a typical roadway project, this is my rule of thumb that I use when I'm basing a budget for a project. If I know it's in the northern part of town where it's unlikely to encounter archaeology, we still have to go out and do the homework. So I put about 5% of the construction cost. If I think it's going to be at risk of encountering something there's a little bit more effort, I put 10%. And if it's closer to the waterfront, I estimate 15 to 20. And that's just rough numbers that I use when I'm doing back of the napkin calculations, preparing for a project. So 1% of the project cost, although this is an anomaly of a project, I think is very good. And compared to the alternative cost, it's just undoable. I don't know how we could do it another way.
Okay, the follow-on then would be, as we, in the previous agenda item, we're always looking for, what is the best use of public funds here? And when I look at an hourly rate, nothing against Mrs. Bush or her firm, but $144 an hour, we've asked this question, and we do now have a staff archaeologist. Should we be looking at, can we bring someone else on to absorb that at these kind of rates? Is the reporting that much more intense that they couldn't, not that we don't still use ERCI, but.
I can help you with that one. Gideon has been is a great asset to the city, and you'll hear from him more tomorrow at the workshop. He has been helping. He helped with curation, assembling all the items for the Pioneer Way project, which I think showed up on the list of bills to be paid. But that was $26,000. That was after a 10% discount because it was submitted perfectly. And if it had to be corrected, we would have been paying the Burke Museum going rate to make any corrections. So he's been helping there, as well as with monitoring when he has time to go out and help out, as well as working with Kelly to team up on ways to make it more efficient. He also helps me with reviewing the proposals that come through and the reports that get sent off to the state.
Okay. And I'm glad you referenced the workshop. I wish we had that workshop before we had to tackle this tonight. You know, and I'm pleased to hear, and I know Mr. Arvidsson's reported that, you know, it started at a week and we've trimmed down to a 48-hour response time or something for, sounds like 5 different encounters. Yeah. So time is money when it comes to all that equipment and the staff sitting out there. For me to swallow this, it probably helps that we're not really slowing the entire project like we've experienced with past large projects in Oak Harbor. So I'll be curious to hear what my peers have to say. Thank you.
Councilor Munns?
I just want to add a compliment to staff and Kelly, because I know through negotiations and building up trust, it has helped out a lot when we happen to find something that it seems to get, each encounter seems to go quicker and faster, and everyone knowing their part. And so that is quite a savings to the city, but also the faith that we are trying to do the best we can. And so thank you very much for your time and effort too, and the staff.
Councilor Omber.
Thank you, Mayor. Joe, could you go to that slide where you had the cost? There, that one right there. Okay, we've started out those, we had the original contract, and then we've had amendments. Have we had amendments to amendments in there?
They're all amendments to the original contract.
Okay, now the reason I ask it that way is, are you telling me that every amendment to that started out with an estimate? And I'm going to go down to the April 21, the outfall monitoring, 23,958. And below that line, those are all based on an estimate before the work was completed, correct? I see Ms. Bush shaking her head yes, and I see Brett shaking his head. Everybody's agreeing to that. Now, are you telling me that on that amendment and the following amendments, the cost came exactly into 35 cents on that one and right to the dollar on all the others? Didn't we have any that were under the proposed cost because these are T&M not to exceed? I would think that there'd be kind of a unused funds that would roll into someplace.
Yeah, and we have stretched the length of these contracts
To the
everywhere.
dollar.
Well, we've exhausted the amount and moved on to the next amendment. So I suppose yes.
That's pretty good estimating when you can
No,
do
that's not what I mean by that. So if, say, we expected the work to take us through September, we've been able to stretch that budget through December in most cases. This is kind of an anomaly on this project because we encountered a lot of things now that we didn't encounter before.
And you already performed that work for this one.
Yes.
Yeah. But the others, let's say on the $215,000 one, that was to do a certain portion of work, estimated the time, admin and all that stuff. And let's say it was that was projected to go from September to January. And are you telling me that you were able to squeeze it to February or March in that same amendment item? Is that how that worked, so that the numbers came out exact?
You're asking a very difficult question because the way I'm thinking of it is each amendment expands what's allowed to spend. And it's a T&M contract that's based on the hourly rates. There's some fees for machinery, but not much. The bulk of it is hourly rate. And this project, quite frankly, up to this point, has been, we've been able to stretch every one of these contracts out as far as we can into the next one. Like the amendment that we issued for Site Prep A, I believe extended into deep excavation monitoring quite some bit.
Okay.
I mean, I'd have to go back and with each one of these and verify where that contract lies with the completion of that work, but I could do that for you.
You gave me the answer. You extended the time and the man-hours in that contract was extended in the schedule, went beyond what you originally planned. I see two heads bobbing up and down, and now I have three. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
All righty.
Okay, any other comments or questions? How would the council like to proceed?
Or all.
All right.
There it is.
Okay, Councilor Omberg.
Thank you. Mayor, I make the motion to authorize the mayor to sign Amendment Number 8 to the Professional Service Agreement with Equinox Research Consulting International, also known as ERCI, for archaeological services related to the new wastewater treatment plant in the amount of $312,516, increasing the total contract amount from $858,209.10 to $1,170,725.10.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion, and it's reads exactly like it shows there. Motion by Allenberg, second by Campbell. Any other comments or questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. We are on to our last item for the evening. Item number 8C, 2017 Water Main Replacement Project, PSA with Gray and Osborne, Inc. Mr. Stoll?
Mayor, council members. I have Arnie Peterschmidt coming into the room here. He's the project engineer on this. So the purpose is to consider awarding a contract with Gray and Osborne for the 2017 water main replacement project. And I'll get in more detail if you haven't already looked at the graphic in the packet about what that means. So in 2013, we updated our water system plan, and it indicated a series of projects to improve not only fire flow, but services through the city. And the projects were listed in the capital plan and broken out into priorities. And we've included those projects in our CIP and in the adopted budget. So we've taken all the way from the plan, all the way through the CIP and into the budget that was approved. So it's nice to be able to tie all that together. It doesn't always work out that way. So why is this project important? It replaces aging steel and asbestos cement pipe. We try to get as many of those as we can. Asbestos cement AC pipe is very fragile. If you try and dig around it with the backhoe, you're guaranteed to spring a leak. It's just one of those, it's an interesting material to work with. And the aging steel, it gets pinhole leaks, and the northeast neighborhoods are probably the worst for this. They're the older neighborhoods, and that's when these materials were popular. So this project also it furthers our goal to, like I said before, improve fire flow, and it will ultimately create a new pressure zone that we're working towards. And this all ties together with the North Reservoir project, the Gun Club Road water mains. All these tie together. Ultimately, it'll stitch together into a new pressure zone. So this is just a real quick, I know the text is small, but the graphic is kind of shows things well. That's our pressure zones as they are today. These are the pressure zones we're attempting to create with the improvements to the system. And the North Reservoir was really the first step in allowing us to do that. So this is just a snapshot out of the water system plan that shows, it's really just to show the total number of projects. You can see they're all over the place. And there's a number of them. And they vary from water lines to pressure reducing stations to wells to, the whole gambit. This particular project is along O'Leary Street from 10th up to the end of O'Leary. And there's a little loop on around 11th and the cul-de-sacs off of that we're going to do the line replacements on as well. There's the next phase we hope to do a little bit later on will be O'Leary the rest of the way down to Whidbey. So we'll be working towards that here pretty soon. It's kind of at an interesting point in design. When we originally contracted with Gray and Osborne a while back, we were looking to do a cross-city transmission main to work with the Navy. The Navy has an existing AC line that cuts across the city, and they were very anxious to do something different because, like we were talking before, AC is fragile pipe. And so we worked with them to come up with a plan that provided a water service that went all the way from Oak Harbor Street across to Goldie and across the north half of the city and eventually down all the way down Regatta to tie in around Whidbey. And we got pretty far along in the design, and then things kind of stalled out. So we already have 60% or close to 60% drawings for what we're proposing to do. So the scope of services is to take it the rest of the way, to finish the plan set, provide cost estimates and bidding support, and actually engineering services during construction, because there's always questions that come up, might as well plan for it. The schedule, tonight we're looking at the design contract. We're looking to go out to authorization to bid as soon as April 4th. That means we come back to you and ask for permission to go out to bid. And then on June 6th, hopefully after, we'll have a contract to award for you. And the goal is to get this completed before the weather's unfavorable to pave. So it's a pretty aggressive schedule, really. And that's the extent of the presentation. If you have any questions, I'm glad to take them.
Thank you, Mr. Stoll. Before we take it on here at the council, I'd like to open it up to the public, see if there's any input, any questions. Going once. Okay, twice. Okay, council. Councilor Servadius.
Thank you. Mr. Stowell, I know we've heard, probably all of us have heard from folks in the Northeast Quadrant about some of the streets up there, especially on O'Leary. Is this, if we move forward with this, will this be, is it just a strip that gets repaved, or will the street be repaved? How big are these lines?
My intent is to do an overlay like we did on 4th Street last year. We're working on whether or not that's going to be fabric with asphalt over the top, or if it's going to be a chip seal. It's not going to be a full rebuild. We don't have the funding for that, but it'll be much better than it is now.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Given a pretty good presentation. How would the council like to proceed? Councilor Wassinger.
Make a motion authorizing the mayor to sign the professional services agreement with the engineering consulting firm of Gray Osborne for design and construction support services related to the 2017 water main replacement project in a not-to-exceed amount of $75,400.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion as appears on the screen there. Motion by Wassinger, second by Servadius. Any other comments, questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you, and that looks to me like we're at the conclusion of our meeting tonight. I would like to say thank you to the Scouts for coming and joining us. Thank you to the leaders who are with them. There was a time in my life way back when I was a Scout, and now you can look forward to being the mayor someday, one of you. One of you folks. Well, or maybe a counselor. Anyone else? Anything? Thanks again. Thanks to the public, and thanks for input, questions, and everything tonight. Comments. Appreciate it. Yes, Councilor Servadius.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and second to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?